Hi, so today we're going to look at anxiety as part of this mental health series. And I particularly wanted to look at this because it's such a massive issue in our societies. Probably about 1 in 4 people will suffer from anxiety or depression at some point in their lives, possibly more because of the pandemic and the things that have been going on over this past year. We all will experience anxiety at some point. I think everybody will have had that feeling of the knot in their stomach, their mouth going dry, the heart pounding, thoughts scattered all over the place. Those feelings that come with anxiety that we identify as stress and anxiety or fear. And actually, anxiety is a good thing as well as being a bad thing when it's appropriate. So the fight flight response that we have in our bodies, it's like a gift, really. So if you're chased by a lion, presuming that could happen, or you're threatened in some way, something is happening that is a threat to you, someone comes at you with a knife or attacks you, then your body goes into a fight flight response almost without you thinking about it, or without you thinking about it. And suddenly you know that your muscles are pumped for action, your mouth is dry, your heart's pounding, ready to run away or to fight. And all the parts of the body that need to be ready for that situation have an increased blood supply, and other parts that, like the stomach, that don't need the blood supply, you get a knot in your stomach because of that feeling that comes. And that's a gift. It's a response that's a gift because we need it sometimes. What isn't so good is when those same feelings come all the time. When all of the day you have the knot in your stomach, or your heart's pounding, or the sweaty feeling, or your thoughts are all over the place. Because that's actually doing us damage. That's inhibiting us from good things. It's actually doing damage to our bodies. We know that a lot of physical things are linked with chronic anxiety, and so that's not a healthy situation to be in. Anxiety is also not good when it stops us from doing things that we want to do. So, it might stop us from going into social situations, or it may stop us going on holiday. It may stop us speaking up in certain situations. It may prevent us from doing positive things, from thinking creatively about other things. And that's not helpful either. Anxiety can focus, I think, on 2 areas. It can focus on the physical and the emotional. So sometimes it's those physical sensations that we have in our bodies that we notice. Sometimes it's more emotional. So we may find that our thinking is just on overdrive all the time, and we can't sleep because our thoughts are just feel out of control. Or it may be that our emotions feel out of control, that we feel weepy or irritable, angry, and that it seems that those things don't correlate with circumstances and are out of hand. So it can be both those areas that we start to notice the symptoms of anxiety. So what actually is anxiety? We can describe it. What actually is it? It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I would describe it as an unpleasant feeling that we get that is inappropriate to the circumstances, that is often linked with something that feels out of control or uncertain. So I'll just say that again. It's an unpleasant feeling that we get, physical or emotional, that is out of proportion to the circumstances or inappropriate for the circumstances, which is often related to something out of control or uncertain. So I think we'll start to unpack that a little bit. Now, often anxiety focuses on something. So, for example, in the surgery, I often find that patients come and tell me that they have anxiety about health-related things, and we could call that health anxiety. So it's an anxiety about something happening to them, them developing some sort of illness, that they've got some sort of illness, that they're going to get some sort of illness, and worrying about all the physical symptoms that they have in their bodies. The other thing that often it focuses on is social situations, so social anxiety, and that can make it difficult to go into situations with other people. So events or parties or things where there's going to be some sort of expectation from other people, or it may be social situations such as presentations or exams or speaking in public. And that's almost, you get the same physical response, but it's almost a bit more of an emotional connection to that. There can be other things that it focuses on as well. And it may be that that's actually the real problem, or it may be that that's actually something to focus on because of something deeper in our lives that we may not even realise is there, or that is more painful to look at. So we tend to focus on that one thing, and all the anxiety goes onto that one thing, and we try and solve that one thing, but it's actually something at a deeper level that's really the problem. I think in terms of the emotional side of things, often there are things around feeling a failure, feeling stupid in front of other people, feeling that we don't measure up in some kind of way, feeling that we won't be accepted or valued, somehow there's something wrong with us. And I think in terms of the physical side of things, there are often things around feeling unsafe, feeling that things are out of control, that something's going to happen in our bodies, often things around fear of death, fear of incapacity, fear of being restricted in what we can physically do. And actually starting to think about what your story is, something that I've talked about before, is a really helpful thing to do. So I had anxiety a number of years ago, and it was quite debilitating for me. I got to the point where my world narrowed down because of the anxiety. I was fearful of something happening to me physically. My heart would race out of control, and I feared that something was going to happen to me, that I was going to drop dead suddenly, or I was going to feel ill and look stupid in the situation that I was in. And my world shrunk down. I got to the point where I almost didn't want to leave the house because I was anxious about what might happen to me. And so actually starting to think about my story was important. At that time, there were lots of other things going on in my life that were quite stressful. And in some ways, I was exhausted, physically exhausted, emotionally exhausted. And the anxiety almost became a focus that was safe at that point. So focusing on this physical health thing became safer than addressing some of the underneath things that were going on in my life that were more emotional and around my identity and my value and my purpose and all those kind of things. So it's important to think about our story, to think about, when did the anxiety first start? What was happening in my life at the time the anxiety started? Was there a pattern? Has this happened before? Have there been previous situations that I can put into a pattern to see a recurring theme, if you like, for the anxiety? What about my family? Were there things modelled to me in my family about how to deal with situations that I can see as a pattern going on in my life? What do I lose by having this anxiety? So what are the things that I would really like to do if I didn't feel anxious? So it may be, you know, I'd be able to socialise more easily, or it may be that you know, I could speak in public. What do I gain from the anxiety? So actually, by being incapacitated like this, I don't actually have to put myself in difficult situations. I don't have to engage with people that are difficult. I don't have to push myself. I don't have to make myself vulnerable. And we have to be honest about what we gain and what we lose from having the anxiety. And then, a bit like I talked about in the last session, our feelings, so our physical feelings and our emotional feelings, come from what we think about and what our belief systems are. So it's really important to start to notice what we're thinking about. What's the pattern of our thinking behind this? So if we've got a recurring pattern of thinking something bad is going to happen to me, I'm going to suddenly collapse and die, nobody likes me, I'm not as good as other people, I'll look stupid if this happens. If we've got these recurring patterns of thinking, then they'll affect our behaviour and our feelings, including anxiety. So starting to try and identify what some of those key thoughts are and belief systems is really important in working out what to do with anxiety and how to get through it and how to manage it, how to master it, if you like, rather than let it master you. I think in terms really practically of what we do, there are some things that can be useful. So on a practical sort of symptom level, if you like, if I'm getting these racing thoughts and I'm getting these racing things happening in my body, it can be helpful to do some physical things to help with that. So physical things include, eating well, not too much caffeine, not too many energy drinks, getting enough sleep, exercising if you can, starting to talk about what's going on, starting to maybe share with a friend what's actually happening for you. Bring it out into the open so that you're not just dealing with it yourself. So some of those things can be really useful in helping to manage anxiety. There are also some good apps, things like relaxation apps. So there's one called Headspace and one called Calm that you do have to pay for, the Headspace one as well. A lot of that is free. If you look on the NHS apps library, there's some there you could have a look at that might be helpful to you. And they can be really useful on a practical level. Now, for some people that's enough. If the anxiety is not too ingrained, then that can be enough just to get it under control again. But I think for a lot of people, there are some underlying factors that they need to look at as well if they really want to get on top of the anxiety and work through it and become well again and not be controlled or incapacitated by it. And the next level is looking at these thinking patterns. Now, CBT, cognitive behaviour therapy, again, we've talked about this before. Changing our thinking, our cognition changes our behaviour and our feelings. There is CBT in the UK through something called IAPT, Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. You can access free online CBT, and if you need to go further with that, you can access one-to-one CBT. There is a wait for that. But there are resources there online. If you do some research, start to look at things around changing your thinking. So CBT type programs that look at changing your thinking patterns. Now, this isn't easy. It's hard work. It was something that I did when I was anxious, was to start to look at what I was thinking about at a deep level. If you can pinpoint the key thoughts, it helps, because you want to try and get the root key thoughts that are behind the fear and anxiety. And as you start to change them, as you start to line them up with something that's more true, then the feelings and the emotions catch up. But it takes time. It takes about 6 weeks to change a pattern of thinking, which seems like a long time. And you have to persevere even when your feelings are telling you something else. So you have to choose to believe what's true and what the new thought is, even though your feelings are telling you something else. And your feelings do catch up at a later date. So I'd strongly recommend looking at what's available through CBT. Now, I do feel that I need to tell you for me what really changed things, because that worked to an extent. But I knew that behind a lot of my anxiety was a really core uncertainty about my value and about my worth, and not wanting to look stupid, not wanting to let people down. I compared myself with other people. And I think that's probably the same for a lot of people, that right at the root of anxiety are things around, where do we get our safety from? Where do we get our security from? Where do I get my value from? Where do I get my worth? What's my purpose in being here? What's the whole point of everything? And that's the bit in anxiety, in the definition, about things that feel out of control or uncertain. I think the pandemic has highlighted for us all that a lot of things are uncertain. Things we thought were certain, we know are uncertain. And actually, a lot of things in life are uncertain. And when we're struggling and battling to try and hold on to those things, to try and get our value from things that could be shaken, then we're going to get anxiety, because actually we can't control them and they are uncertain. So actually starting to acknowledge that for me was a big thing, and actually starting to think about, well, what is certain? What is really true? And that's where my faith in God comes in. And I think in the West, we're not very good at talking about spiritual things. We're not good at talking about the spiritual realm and about faith and God. But actually in a lot of parts of the world, that's a normal part of conversation. And just because we don't do it doesn't mean that's good. And so I think it's really important to start to think about and consider, well, where do I come from? What am I here for? What's the point in everything? What is safe? What is secure? What is safe? What is true? And so I've come to the conclusion that I have a loving God who gives me safety and gives me security and protects me and gives me value and worth as his child. And that's because of Jesus. That's because he became real. He came to earth in Jesus, and Jesus showed us what God is really like. And if you read about Jesus in the Bible, particularly maybe read in Matthew or Mark, about what Jesus was like and how he loved people and he didn't judge people and he cared for people and he provided for what they needed. And that's a picture of what our God is like. And so my value, my sense of safety, my sense of acceptance and security had to shift. And I did quite a lot of my thinking work came around thinking about how God loves me, how he keeps me safe, how he is an unshakable foundation who is certain. What he says is certain and true, and he's in control. So by making that shift, suddenly I can be at peace. So when Jesus says, don't be anxious about anything, it's like, how do you do that? How do you not be anxious about anything? But then it goes on to say, give your requests to God, and the peace of God, which goes past our thinking and our understanding, keeps our heart and minds safe in God. And it's like, I'll choose to believe that. I'm going to choose to believe that because that is my rock. That's my foundation. So I'd really encourage you to start to think about some of those foundational things, what you really believe. Do some investigating, look it up. So if we go back to maybe a process for what to do if we're feeling really, really anxious at the moment, I think the first thing is to acknowledge it and to maybe talk to somebody about it. It can be helpful to go and see a medical professional if you're really struggling. Occasionally anxiety is linked with something physical going on, so for example medication or an overactive thyroid, and it may be appropriate to check that out. So I think if you're really struggling, go and talk to somebody about it. However, most of the time anxiety is linked with these underneath things that are going on, our thought processes and our belief systems, and there isn't a quick fix. It's a process. It's a process that takes time and effort. It's a process that we need to choose to want to engage with. We need to take responsibility for our own stuff, as well as getting help from other people. There are some things we have to take responsibility for ourselves. But I'd really encourage you to start on that journey. There is a lot of help out there. It's worth having a look at the Mind website again. They have some really good resources on there. If you're in the UK, Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, IAPT, Google IAPT in the nearest town that you're in, or just IAPT, and there's some really good resources on there. And seek it out. Look for things that are going to help you, particularly around the CBT type approach. And do consider what might be really underneath it, what might be really at the root of it. And from my experience, it's often something around our identity, around how we value ourselves, where we feel safe, where we get that from. and the anxiety is coming because we're trying to look in the wrong places to satisfy those things and to get the affirmation and the safety that we need in those areas. So I hope that's been helpful. I'll put a couple of links on the website as well for you, so you can see those if you need them.